folks. This is Fergus Hodgson. I'm managing editor of the Impunity Observer. This is a geopolitical publication, investigative journalistic endeavor. And we have today our first roundtable. So I'm so pleased to join you live. This is our first live stream. And I have my two colleagues, both researchers based in Ecuador. That's Paz Gomez and Mauro Echeverria. I hope I pronounced that one correctly. And we're going to the basic goal here is to examine the work we're doing in a more, let's say, palatable form, not just in written form. So we can discuss a topic that we've been researching, writing about in a more informal manner. And the topic this month is the riots, or let's say, I call it terrorism, but uprising in Ecuador. But if you want to get more details and if you want to subscribe, please go to impunityobserver.com. We'd love to have subscribers. We need all your support. And I'm very proud of the work we're doing and would like to see it grow. So the article which we've published on this, we have another one in the works, is titled "Leftist Rioters Paralyze Ecuador to Topple President." And this one has a heck of a lot of meat in it by, this is our author, Sebastian. So Andreas Sebastian Diaz Ponce is the author of it, although we don't have him live because his Spanish is his dominant language, but we have Mauro and Paz in Quito, Ecuador right now to talk about it. So before we get into, I guess, the deeper explanation of what's going on, what is the latest on the ground? Have the riots or blockades subsided after beginning about 1 month ago?
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today, starting these roundtables and talking about Ecuador, what happened 2 weeks ago here in the country. Basically, after 18 days in riots, this was blockades and everything, so people on the productive sector was not able to go ahead. The government started a dialogue with the main sectors that were protesting. In special, indigenous groups, people that the drivers of trucks and things like that. They are also part of the dialogues, and the idea is to get into the 10 petitions that the indigenous group suggested that are more labor rights, more subsidies to the gasoline. That is something that was already achieved because that was the way in which the riots ended. But there are other 10 points. For instance, there was shortage of medicine, so they are also discussing how medicine in public hospitals is going to be delivered and supplied in a timely and good way, and things like that. So now we have passed, I think that is 15-20 days of these dialogues, and they have 90 days in total in which they have to discuss all these topics, and after that we are going to see what is going on, if they accept this agreement or if they not accept this agreement, and what is going to happen.
Right. And so just to clarify for folks, 6 people have died during these riots, although 2 of them died not necessarily from the riots directly. They were basically on their way to the hospital and were blockaded, and therefore died, of course, that would otherwise have been treated. Now, Mauro, do you want to clarify? So does that mean that all the blockades have subsided? The violence has all subsided now?
The violence regarding the riots, yes, partially, because we're still trying to see if the government and the indigenous organizations reach a final agreement in these 10 topics that they have been requesting. These petitions regarding oil, production, natural resources. So partially yes, but we're still waiting for the final agreement in all the 10 topics that they are discussing right now.
Yeah, so basically thousands of people became violent in June, and they made a bunch of demands. And unfortunately, the president Guillermo Lasso, I guess he said he would sit down and come to some kind of agreement with them rather than enforce the law. Now it is concerning to me. Now, just for a bit of context for people who are not familiar with it, what is this National Indigenous Confederation, CONAI, and how democratic is it? What is its relevance or actual, let's say, authority to speak on behalf of Indigenous people?
That is in fact a great question, because how can this organization like talk on behalf of every indigenous? Well, there are, it's kind of tricky because there are different organizations, let's say, that speak on behalf of indigenous groups, but this one is certainly the strongest one in Ecuador. However, they don't necessarily speak on behalf of every indigenous, because some of them were not even like in favor of the riots, because they needed to produce and to keep working. So it's kind of difficult, but they have a lot of political power. And through the past years, since the 2019 protests and riots here in Ecuador, they have continuously grown and gained a lot of political power. So it's difficult because they don't necessarily represent the entire indigenous communities in Ecuador.
Right, and there is this organization. The man's name is Isa. So the man who leads this CONAI, and this is one of the scary elements. And also for some context, there was a similar uprising in 2019, which basically set a precedent. And I think in 2021, or was it earlier this year, there was an amnesty granted to all those who had committed crimes during that time. So they're almost rewarded for it. Now, this man Isa has written a book, Outbreak. And what's the Spanish translation of outbreak? What's the original word?
El estallido.
This is an important quote that people should know. The light at the end of the tunnel is the beloved, desired, and urgent statement. Give us Indian American communism or suffer barbarism. So this gentleman, if I can call him that, he is not hiding at all his strategy. It is intimidation to get what he calls Indian American communism. I don't know what that is exactly. And he will use, yes, road blockades, extortion, raids, looting. And do you want to comment, since we obviously cover all sorts of topics in Latin America, about, is it actually coordinated with the movements, similar uprising or similar violent events in Chile or Colombia, or they're just copying each other without actually working together? Do we know that?
I think it's kind of both. First, because if you remember in 2019, they were almost in the same time. And even in Ecuador, it started first, for instance, than in Chile. Then Chile, Colombia have worse events than Ecuador, but they happened in a similar way and in similar moments. I think that there is a coordination. Also, it is important to see that these kind of riots that last for more than 2 weeks need a lot of financing, and this financing needs to get from somewhere. So here, people, the intelligence secretary of the state is estimating that this riot of 18 days cost around $15 to $20 million. So who is giving this money is not only CONAIE and indigenous people. So maybe they have legitimate petitions, but this is also coordinated by someone else. And what we can see behind is two things, and there is what we are trying to keep investigating is for one front is drug traffickers, and in the other front is people that is now opposition, the leftist politicians, and especially the radical leftist movements such as Leonidas Issa, because Leonidas Issa is also a leader of the radical wing of CONAIE.
Okay. Yeah, it is hard to know. We are exploring this. Who exactly is funding this operation? And the return on investment is terrible because what's the latest estimate of the economic cost to the country? And this is only the immediate costs, right? Mauro, have you looked into that?
Yeah, according to the Ministry of Production here in Ecuador, these entire 18 days of riots cost around $1 billion to the country. Some of them to private companies and some other to like public state companies. So this tells us that the losses from these riots in 2022 have been worse than the ones from 2019, according to Diario Expreso. So it's really huge. And apart from that, we've been recovering from the pandemic,
Yeah.
economically. So it's only affecting ourselves. It's not really helping the country.
Self-inflicted pain. Yeah, and
Yeah.
like you said, it's an extremely vulnerable or sensitive time for Ecuador because you're trying to get out of the whole COVID lockdown era and recover economically. Now, there's a lot going on here, and I just want to go through a few of the other crimes that these protesters, not only have they been blocking roads and ambulances, they have polluted tap water pipelines with engine oil. I mean, I don't know what kind of friends they think they're going to make doing that. They have blocked and trespassed on oil wells, and they've even kidnapped judges and police and military officers. They burned a police station and a bank branch. So this is some serious endeavor here. Now, so why don't you tell me a little bit about this? Let's say this alliance. How much actual public support does this movement have? Or does everyone just see them as a bunch of gangsters? Do people sympathize with them?
Yes, I think that is why, in their strategy, they get into the indigenous movement, because now is this trend of empathy, and that is why what people from the middle class is talking about is empathy with the ones that do not have job right now, empathy with the ones with the indigenous group, empathy with the ones that have walked through all the streets and the roads to get into the capital city and protest and get and have a voice of their rights and things like that. So I think that they are trying to use this kind of vulnerable group, which they are not necessarily, but this kind of vulnerable group in the indigenous movement, to be the face of the protests. And this has softened the public opinion regarding the crimes and the violence surrounding the riots. People say that they think that the reasons of the indigenous movement were legitimate. However, they perceived that it was enough, that destruction was enough too, and that the protests were turning violent. So that was the public opinion and general perspective of the riots at the end. I think that the last day was kind of confusing to the citizens, because in the last night there were more attacks. 2 other public stations were burned. There were other things that more occupations and things like that. But the next day, it seems that it was going to become worse, and then they got the agreement. So basically, the government decided to raise the subsidy by 15 cents more per gallon in the gasoline, and it was and to have these 90 days of dialogue, and that in that way they suspended the riot. Of course, that was important because they were doing more and more violence and more attacks. But and the other part was, and what is going to happen with these people that have done crimes and that have created turmoils? And there is not an agreement on that. There is not a declaration or a statement saying what is going to happen to them. So I think that this creates confusion and uncertainty in people. And I think that this affects more the government than the indigenous movement and the people that was protesting.
Yeah, and I just want to reassert the fact that I'm so proud of this work that Sebastian has done. And we do have an English version of the article at impunityobserver.com. And one of the points he makes is that the goal of the riots is to create a violent confrontation and then plead to be victims of crackdowns by police and armed forces. So the socialist agitators, they can get this outrage and condemn authorities as repressive and, quote, neoliberal tyrants. And it's just very peculiar that anyone would buy this, but apparently many people do buy it. They think that it's just supposedly peaceful. And I guess if you are careful enough with how you put out content and coverage and you downplay the violence, your violence, and then shine a spotlight on police crackdowns, it makes them seem like a bunch of aggressive guys. But the truth is the police really have lost control of the situation. Mauro, do you want to comment on that? That the police really are outmanned?
Yeah, it's also a difficult situation because it depends on the region and the city. In some parts of the Amazon region here in Ecuador, some indigenous groups are really violent and easily kidnap policemen or armed forces. So it's kind of difficult. And there's also this huge discussion here that these groups can be violent because they have been suffering for a long time. So we have to accept their violence or somehow be empathic with their violence. And it's like, no, because like your right to protest or to do public demonstrations cannot limit other people's rights to, let's say, move around the city or any other rights.
So many people perceive it as the violence is justified given past wrongs.
Exactly, or like let's say in rural areas they have a lot of child malnutrition.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, so just because of that, it means that they can come to, I don't know, let's say Quito, the capital, and burn anything or block any roads. And it's not like that. I mean, one thing that's wrong doesn't convert the other thing.
Two wrongs don't make a right.
Exactly.
Yeah, this is it. Well, and Sebastian made the claim that the real goal was to oust Lasso from the presidency. Now, will they be happy if he still is, I guess, nominally the president, but all his policies are basically gone? So it's really a waste. His presence is almost meaningless.
Yes, I think that that is this radical left part of the group that was in the protests, and also the political movement of the former president Rafael Correa, who were interested in having him out. Also Leonidas Issa. Also his intention was to get him out. And that is what he says in his book Outbreak, that basically he would have to take power by force because Ecuadorian people is so racial to be to vote in favor of an indigenous man. But
Oh, they would not support an indigenous candidate. Is that true?
Yeah.
Maybe it's true. I don't know.
I don't know. No, now Pachacutic has, that is the indigenous party, has a majority, a minor majority, but a majority in the legislative, in the Congress, in the National Assembly. So yes and no, but well, it was this intention about of ousting Lasso, and this was because I guess that during 15 years, if they were not more, the government has given rights to different political forces. So there were people that were controlling the prisons. There were people that were controlling monopolies and public contracts, public works and things like that. So when Lasso came into the president, when he was candidate, people were saying, "I want to donate for your campaign" and things like that, and he had a limit of donations. In that way, it was a way of saying, "I'm not going to give to all favors to anyone. You can donate for my campaign, but just until a limit." So following that behavior in his campaign, what I guess is that he and his administration is trying to get the things right, but institutions are already weakened and are already taken by other political forces. So this is kind of a political clash and personal interest clash in which they want their piece of cake again. And for having this piece of cake, the best way of getting it is getting Lasso out, but overthrowing Lasso. But they already tried by a kind of parliament vote that we have here. Is not a parliament system, but we have a kind of that because of the constitution. And there was not the enough majority to oust Lasso from the legislative power branch. So they cannot use this legal figure again during this administration. But let's see what happens. Governability is bad right now, and Lasso cannot get into he cannot get past reforms, economic reforms that are important and things like that, because he has not enough approval in the Congress. So it's also a thing that if he is not able to govern in the best way in that sense.
Yeah, that's the challenge. It can be very confusing from the outside because Lasso is somewhat or slightly in favor of market liberalization as much as he can. And yet, and you have basically some entrenched, let's say, criminal factions within government partnering with those who claim to be reformers, right? These protesters. It's very confusing. And what do you think is going to happen? We're just waiting now for these negotiations, and no one really knows what's going to come out of them, basically.
Yeah, so it's very difficult because we don't know what's, like you said, we don't know what's gonna come out of this. Hopefully they'll reach an agreement because violence isn't. It's not good for anyone.
It's deleterious to Ecuador's status as an investment destination, right? That's the big problem. And I'll note here that the risk premium on investment in Ecuador has gone up by about 10%, which means that, it doubled, and it's going up to about 10% from 5 to 10%, which means that if the Ecuadorian government, which is already crazily indebted, wants to borrow more, they have to basically pay twice as much to get debt, right? So it has a tremendous, let's say, dampening on the growth of the country. And so it is unpredictable, but I guess the precedent in Colombia suggests that at least there they were able to convert this violence into an electoral victory. When is the next election in Ecuador? And is there a candidate trying to, let's say, ride the wave of this movement?
Well, we have the local elections scheduled for February 2023. So they are close.
Okay.
Of course, they are not going to elect the president, but all the local governments. But it is an important, since we have like a decentralized political system in territory, it is an important stake for political movements.
Yes.
And I think that the timing is kind of crucial when they did the riots, and in 1 month, political movements have to declare which are going to be their candidates. So I guess that they are going to have a first take in the political environment in Ecuador in those elections, in the local elections. And then we have the presidential election for 2025 in February again, and maybe they are going to present a leftist candidate. Right now, I do not see kind of caudillo as Correa was, this kind of populist candidate that has a lot of approval. There is not a leader as that until now, but who knows? We have 2 years for that. That in the one situation, and in the other situation is that what you say about the risk premium, that is also important to mention here, because during the first year of the Lasso administration, there has not been basically public works, but there has been an important reduction of the fiscal deficit and an important increase in the sovereign reserves.
Yes.
Since people in Ecuador is used to socialist policies, nanny state policies, basically what they want is that the government should use these reserves to provide the medicine supplies and to provide jobs and create public jobs or whatever. And now the government is facing this challenge, that is putting the finances in order or assisting the short-term needs of the population, which is a high political cost. This political cost could be significant during the local election, where the ruling party can lose, and the opposition parties can win more local governments representation.
Yeah. So basically, there's a great deal of tension between some sort of fiscal austerity or restraint or responsibility and placating a bunch of people who want free stuff right now. And okay, now, Mulder, maybe you want to take this one. Do you see any problems with international coverage of what's going on in Ecuador that you want to correct or push back against?
I don't see much problems with the coverage, international coverage in Ecuador. There's this tendency there's this trend of seeing things in a very leftist way and supporting rioters instead of focusing on rule of law. And
Sure.
That's kind of difficult to see from the inside, because they're presenting a different perspective, which is not necessarily the correct one or the most appropriate one, according to the situation here. And also there are a lot of organizations that advocate for, let's say, environment, and they are in favor of this protest because one of the demands from CONAIE and indigenous groups are like less space for extractivist companies. At the same time, they are supporting cheaper oil.
It is a confusion. Yeah, they want cheap oil, but don't want to take it out of the ground.
Exactly. So it's kind of difficult, and they present this to the exterior, and it doesn't make much sense to me.
Right. it is confusing. That one bit about the international coverage is just that, in general, I fear, not necessarily deliberately, but journalists in the United States or the Europe or whatever who cover Ecuador do not understand how they might be played, right? Where they get one version, they get the peaceful protests version of events, whereas really these are very violent or criminal events. And we were going. My plan was to go for only half an hour here, but maybe, Paz, you want to wrap up by commenting on how these protests interact with organized crime, because my understanding is that even drug trafficking, for example, has come under pressure. There's been more enforcement from Lasso. So on the one hand, there's more enforcement, but also there's more crime going on in Ecuador. And how does this play into these protests, which, as you've noted, are very strategic in their timing politically, right? It seems like there's much more organized or careful campaign rather than some kind of spontaneous uprising, because there was no real clear catalyst. So what is the relationship with organized crime in the country and these protests? What can you say about that, if you can say anything at all?
Well, we can see as a modus operandi of organized crime, and we can see this in all the region. When a new administration starts, they usually uprise the levels of violence until trying not to negotiate with the governments. Ecuador is now in a situation that is happening this, because we have seen this in Mexico, we have seen this in Colombia. Now it happened in Ecuador. It already happened when the former president Moreno got into it. There was an uprising, then they negotiated, and there was fine. When Lasso got into the presidency, he didn't negotiate. So this violence uprising continued. There was a lot of violence and crime in the prisons, because basically before, organized crime was in command of these prisons. And the government stopped all the kind of privileges that were hidden, but that were given to these organized crime organizations. And this created a wave of violence. So in the capital cities of Quito and Guayaquil, it started to happen like cruel violence and cruel crimes. So there was a hanged man in Guayaquil and things like that. That was like scary for people. And of course, insecurity perception increased. That is why, for instance, people say it's legitimate to protest against this insecurity rise. But we have to understand that most of this insecurity is not caused because of robbers that do not have enough job and want to steal food and money. This is caused because of organized crime that is behind this, trying to create more disorder and more insecurity, and trying to pressure the government to negotiate with them. So that in one side. In the other side is that also the leadership in Guayaquil and Quito, that are growing, emerging cities that are becoming metropolitan areas and things like that, is not the best leadership in our history. So of course this created more and more chaos and disorder. So just yesterday in the capital city Quito, we had another attack in the financial center. Another crime with arms and everything. So this is creating fear to the people. But what you see behind is that now the organized crime organizations and these kind of criminal gangs do not have the control in prisons. The government has confiscated more than any other year in 2021 and 2022 of drugs. So you see that there is this kind of recovery that they want to do. Another thing that was kind of alarming was that there were non-working airports in little cities of the country that were occupied by these crime organizations, and they were using them freely before Lasso administration started. So the Lasso administration put order there, put security in those airports, and of course now they cannot occupy these airports for drug shipments and things like that. So you see that this is the reason why also these people is trying to create pressure with more and more violence.
Yeah, so there really is a great deal of, let's say, politically motivated crime, right, within the agenda. It's not yet to get to steal from people or to, I don't know, they're not turf wars, but really they are a war with the regime. Okay, Moto, is there any final remark you might have that we didn't touch upon?
Let me see. No, probably just that the riots, while leaders claim that the riots were because of some like popular motivation,
Right.
it's just like it's clear that it was just because of a leftist political agenda that this indigenous organization is trying to impose to the government.
Okay, folks, if you've been tuning in live, thanks so much. And I'm just so honored to work with Mauro and Paz Gomez, Mauro Echeverria. And you can find more of their work and our work at impunityobserver.com. Please do consider subscribing. And if not, getting a paid subscription, you can get on our email list. Follow us on Telegram, Twitter, LinkedIn, wherever. We're on various platforms. And thanks for tuning in, and I look forward to next month when we can have another roundtable discussion.
Thank you, Fergus. Thank you all.